When you've given 18 years of your life to building someone else's empire, you expect loyalty. Or at the very least, respect. What you don't expect is to be fired by the same man whose first job you hired him into. That man was Bradley Voss, the golden boy turned tyrant, the slick-talking CEO with a Harvard smile and a dagger always tucked behind his back. And me? I was Elias Ward, former senior VP of strategy at Solvix Technologies, a company I helped grow from a cramped three-room startup into a skyscraper-dwelling tech giant with offices in 5 countries. They call me the Ghost, not because I was invisible, but because I was quiet. I didn't shout in meetings or court headlines. I moved in silence, stitched strategies together behind the scenes, and let louder men like Brad take the spotlight. And he took all of it. It started on a rainy Thursday. I was reviewing a projected merger with an AI firm in Toronto when HR called me upstairs. That should have been the first sign. HR never summoned me, because I never made mistakes. But when I stepped into the room, Brad was already there. In his navy blue suit, perfectly creased, with that same smug smirk he used to flash when trying to win over investors. Beside him sat the new head of HR, Kara, young, sharp, and far too confident for someone who'd only been here 3 months. Brad didn't even let me sit. Elias, we're restructuring. We've decided to eliminate your role effective immediately. I blinked. Excuse me. It's not personal, he said, faux sincerely. You've been a tremendous asset, but the board wants new energy. New energy? Translation. You're too smart, too old, or too much of a threat. Maybe all 3. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I signed the papers, shook his hand, and left the glass tower I had helped design. But what Brad didn't know was that he had just started the countdown to his own unraveling. After I walked out of Solvix Technologies with a severance check and a forced smile, I didn't go home to cry. I went home a plan. Revenge isn't an outburst. It's a blueprint. And I had 18 years of inside knowledge, a full map of Solvix's weak points, and one critical advantage. I knew Bradley Voss better than he knew himself. Most people assumed I was just a strategy guy. But what Brad forgot, what everyone forgot, was that I had architected the entire acquisition pipeline, negotiated every major contract, and wrote the original bylaws for the executive board when the company went public. They call me the Ghost. And now I was going to haunt every inch of that empire. Step 1 wasn't about striking. It was about watching. From the outside, I created a new consulting firm under a dummy name, Ward & Locke Advisory, registered in a state with strict corporate privacy laws. The kind of shell firm designed to stay invisible. Then I began recruiting in the shadows. Not loudly, quietly, strategically. I contacted Melinda, one of the lead project managers who'd been demoted under Brad's regime for not aligning with the new culture. She had been with Solvix for over a decade, loyal, efficient, and, now, quietly bitter. I didn't tell her my full plan, just that I was starting something new, that I wanted her insight, that she'd be paid well for it. She agreed. Then came Rafi, a brilliant coder who left Solvix after Brad outsourced his entire department to a cheap overseas firm and took the credit for their final product. Rafi still had his NDAs, of course, but I wasn't asking for secrets. Just patterns, habits, names. Within 6 weeks, I had 6 former Solvix employees working under me on contract. All disgruntled, all smart, all patient. And they weren't the only ones watching. Someone inside Solvix was leaking things to me. At first, I thought it was Melinda's friend, or maybe Rafi's old contact. But the files I began receiving weren't minor. They were board-level confidential. Monthly performance reviews, expense breakdowns, internal memos with Brad's signature. Someone close to the top wanted Bradley gone, and they were willing to risk everything to help me make it happen. Now I just needed a trigger, something to get the public, the shareholders, and the board all to look at him differently. Something undeniable, something documented. And then the trigger came from the most unlikely place. You don't break a fortress with a battering ram. You find a fault line and tap. And the fault line arrived one Tuesday morning, inside an anonymous email. Subject line: Ask Brad about Orion, no sender, no signature, just one attachment. A scanned 3-page document stamped internal use only. I opened it. Read it once, then again, and then I smiled. The document was a private agreement between Solvix and a defense contractor called Sable Orion Group, a firm blacklisted in several countries for covert surveillance tech and data harvesting. The contract was clear. Solvix, under Brad's signature, was licensing out user data from one of its cloud subsidiaries, covertly, quietly, and entirely off the books. It was exactly the kind of deal that would tank the company's stock if it ever went public. Worse, the agreement wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. The subsidiary, Cloud Nova, hosted medical and legal data for clients in regulated industries. Leaking it would be catastrophic. I had the trigger, but I couldn't just post it online or leak it to the press. No, Brad was too slippery for that. He'd call it fake, threaten legal action, spin the media. I needed the right pressure point, a voice too big to ignore and too clean to doubt. So I turned to someone Solvix had pissed off years ago. Carolyn Huxley, former COO, fired after clashing with Brad over financial ethics. Respected, connected, still bitter. I arranged a meeting, not as Elias Ward, as Mr. Locke from Ward and Locke Advisory. Carolyn showed up guarded, but curious. I showed her the file. She read it in silence, then said 5 words that told me I'd made the right move. I always knew he was dirty. Carolyn didn't go to the press. She went to the Securities and Exchange Commission, filed a confidential whistleblower complaint using the document I gave her. Then she called a few friends still in the corporate media world. Within a week, rumors were swirling in finance blogs about Solvix's mysterious foreign dealings. Brad issued a smug denial. Baseless. Anonymous attacks. The usual. But the SEC doesn't run on rumors. And just like that, a quiet investigation was underway. Federal, slow-moving, silent. Exactly the way I needed it. Because I didn't want Brad fired. Not yet. I wanted him to feel the walls closing in. To look around that glass office and wonder, who's watching me? Because the truth was, everyone was. In a fortress made of glass, you don't need to break down walls. You just show people what's happening inside. Brad didn't know it, but the moment Carolyn filed that complaint, the countdown began. The SEC had subpoenaed records. Quietly. Discreetly. No headlines. Just a soft knock on Solvix's shiny door. But something else happened, a shift. Brad's lieutenants started to look uneasy. Like Trish, VP of Compliance. Sharper than she pretended to be. She'd always smiled too easily around Brad. But lately, that smile had a crack in it. At a quarterly review, she hesitated before presenting a redacted vendor ledger. Brad noticed. So did I. Later, in the elevator, I said, "Looks like you almost slipped up in there." She stared at me, then said quietly, "You think I don't know what's going on?" I didn't answer, just looked at her. She added, "Be careful, Elias." That's when I knew. She was scared of something. Or someone. Probably both. Meanwhile, I kept feeding the SEC. Not directly. Everything went through Carolyn, who by now had roped in 2 journalists from Business Ledger Weekly. They were sniffing. And Brad? Brad was overcompensating. More speeches. More chest-thumping emails to Team Solvix. He started reorganizing departments, shuffling leadership, trying to flush out the mole he didn't even understand existed. Then he made a mistake. He fired Devin Green, mid-level analyst. Brilliant. Socially invisible. But Devin knew where all the digital bones were buried. He handled back-end audit logs. 2 days after Devin was let go, a file appeared on my personal email. No message. No subject line. Just a zip folder titled, Ghostlag_final. Inside were access logs, time-stamped entries of Brad using an admin override to alter datasets connected to Cloud Nova's customer privacy settings. The kind of thing that violates a dozen federal statutes. Devin had seen everything. He hadn't gone to the press. He came to me. Because somehow, in this empire of ego and ambition, I was the only one who watched and didn't flinch. That night, I walked past Brad's glass office. He was alone, staring at a document, jaw clenched, rubbing his forehead. He knew something was wrong. He could feel the noose tightening. He just didn't know that the rope was already in my hands. They say a company's boardroom is where the future is decided. But sometimes, it's where ghosts whisper, and empires begin to rot. Brad held his quarterly executive board meeting like a coronation. Same private conference room. Same catered sushi. Same glass walls overlooking the city. Except this time, the air felt different. Tense. One by one, the board members filed in. Chambers, the old Wall Street fossil who backed Brad from day one. Cassandra, the quiet but shrewd investor from Boston, and Gregor, the numbers guy, who never spoke unless something really scared him. Brad smiled, confident, but I noticed a twitch in his right eye. Something was unraveling behind his cool facade. Then came a power move. Gregor dropped a printed spreadsheet on the table. Why? He asked. Were these quarterly returns revised after they were reported to investors? Silence. Brad froze for a fraction of a second, then replied smoothly. Clerical oversight. We were cleaning up legacy data. Gregor pushed his glasses up. Funny. That same oversight appears in 3 past quarters too. Everyone looked at me. I said nothing. I wasn't the one who had to. Cracks were spreading on their own. But Brad still had one trick left. Intimidation. The next morning, Devin Green, the quiet analyst who sent me the audit logs, was hit with a cease and desist letter for breach of contract and unauthorized data sharing. Not just fired now, being hunted. So I did what Brad would never suspect. I want to see Devin. In person. He lived in a modest studio on the edge of the city. When he opened the door, he looked exhausted. Bags under his eyes, like he hadn't slept in days. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't mean to drag you into this. I shook my head. You didn't. You're just the first domino. Then I handed him a burner phone. If anything happens, anything at all, call this number. He stared at me. You're not scared? He asked. Terrified, I said. But fear is what makes you pay attention to every detail. And Brad? Brad stopped being afraid a long time ago. Back at Solvix, the HR department suddenly received anonymous allegations about Brad's conduct. Unethical bonus schemes, favoritism, verbal abuse. None of it traced back to me. But the timing? Impeccable. Every fire Brad tried to put out only sparked another. Because this wasn't just revenge. It was a strategy. And the best part? Brad still didn't know who was pulling the strings. There's always a canary in every coal mine. In corporations, they're usually found in the compliance department. Those quiet, overlooked souls who shuffle paperwork, manage risk, and spot the poison before anyone else smells it. Brad treated them like wallpaper. But I knew better. Her name was Mia Tran. She'd worked at Solvix for 10 years. Soft-spoken. Always wore gray. The kind of person you'd forget, until you noticed that nothing ever escaped her desk without a review. And Mia? She had questions. I invited her for coffee outside the office. Neutral ground. She showed up early and ordered chamomile tea. No small talk. Just this. I know you're behind the board inquiry. I didn't flinch. Neither did she. What tipped you off? I asked. She pulled out a slim folder. Inside, internal memos, signed by Brad, showing retroactive approval for vendor invoices that had already been paid, some from companies that didn't exist 6 months ago. These are fraud, she said quietly. But no one upstairs will touch them. I looked at the dates. Cross-reference in my mind. It matched the timeline Devin had flagged in the audit trail. And then Mia said something that changed everything. I think Brad's laundering money through dead contractors. That was the twist I didn't expect. This wasn't just about bonuses or inflated contracts. Brad was using Solvix as a personal laundering machine, and compliance had been raising red flags that mysteriously disappeared in revision cycles. Mia, however, had backups. Not on Solvix servers. Not on company drives. On an encrypted flash drive she wore around her neck. You need to disappear for a while, I told her. Mia shook her head. No, I want to see this through. So we made a pact. If anything happened to her, I'd release everything. Publicly. Completely. She handed me a decoy copy of Drive. I gave her a contact at the whistleblower hotline I'd previously tested under an alias dot, and just like that, Mia became the second piece on my chessboard. A knight, hidden in plain sight. Back at headquarters, Brad had no idea that 2 of the people he passed daily in the hallway were building the noose around his empire. He was too busy trying to plug holes in the budget, silence rumors, and prepare for his upcoming keynote address. An address he believed would cement his legacy. But legacies don't get built with lies. They get buried in them. In every corporate machine, there's one system that no one truly understands. The audit trail. It's a jungle of dates, numbers, logins, timestamps. Most people avoid it like the plague. But me? I built a career off navigating chaos. And that's exactly what the audit files were. Elegant chaos, until Brad touched them. I gained access under a pretext, an internal controls review, I pitched to the CFO using words like regulatory pressure and risk mitigation. Buzzwords open doors. Once inside, I requested system backups from 6 months prior. What I received: 2 sets of records. Identical, at first glance, but not under scrutiny. Line by line, I compared the logs. Invoices had been approved by terminated employees. Access codes from Brad's assistant had been used to override purchase orders at 2 a.m., long after she clocked out. There were dozens of these discrepancies. But here's the real kicker. Every time the numbers didn't align, the official audit trail had one thing in common: a redaction. The metadata showed a single editor. User ID, b.keller_admin. Timestamp, 4:12 a.m. Location, executive VPN. Brad was editing the audit logs himself. It was digital forgery, which meant intentional fraud, a felony. I encrypted the original logs, copied them to multiple secure drives, and stashed backups in separate physical locations. Not paranoid, just prepared. That same night, Mia messaged me. Check the compliance report for Q2. Brad removed 3 flag vendors. I have the originals. She did. And guess who was listed as the approving officer on all 3 vendors? Me. Brad had inserted my name into fake contracts. Why? Simple. If anything blew up, he could point fingers at me. He wasn't just laundering money. He was building a fall guy. It was the first time I felt cold. Truly cold. This wasn't just revenge anymore. Brad was playing for my life, my license, my future. And that was his final mistake. Because now, I wouldn't just ruin him. I'd erase him. Continue. Most people think CEOs answer to no one. But there's always someone above them. Someone with enough shares to make kings kneel. They're called silent stakeholders. Wealthy, private, and invisible to the day-to-day operations. Brad forgot about one of them. I didn't. Her name was Vivian Stroud, the widow of the company's late founder, Arthur Stroud. She owned 22% of the company's stock, not enough to command the board, but more than enough to topple a CEO. Brad kept her isolated, out of meetings, out of the loop, out of power. But I knew something Brad didn't. Vivian had one weakness. Not money, not recognition, legacy. I reached out to her under a false pretense, an anonymous letter. Inside, I placed photocopies of the doctored audit logs, highlighted every instance Brad had tampered with financials. Then, I included the falsified contracts with my name forged on them. Voice of a woman who built empires behind her husband's throne. I told her everything, minus the parts that would incriminate me. She didn't interrupt once. At the end, she said only 2 words: bring proof. I met her in a private room at an upscale law firm. No cameras, no records. She wore black silk gloves and a look that could freeze oxygen. I handed over a flash drive and a folder of documents. She read for 15 minutes straight, without a word. Then, she looked up and asked the question I had been waiting for. If I remove him, who replaces him? I didn't blink. Not me. I want justice, not power. She smiled. The first real smile I'd seen in weeks. By the time I left that room, I had something more powerful than evidence. I had Vivian Stroud's wrath. And Brad, he didn't even know. I left a handwritten note. He's not just stealing from the company. He's erasing your husband's legacy. Call me if you still believe in Arthur Stroud's name. I signed it, EW. 2 days passed. Nothing. Then, on the 3rd morning, a call. Private number. Is this Elias Ward? Yes. You have 10 minutes. Talk. Her voice was sharp, measured. Theo, she was awake. Brad didn't panic when money went missing. He didn't flinch when employees quit. But there was one thing that shook him to his core. A data breach. Even a rumor of it would rattle investors, tank the stock, and invite the kind of scrutiny he couldn't bribe or bully. That's why I didn't launch a cyber attack. I planted the whispers of one. It started with a single email, then 2, then a Slack message sent anonymously to the entire dev team. Does anyone know why our client database was accessed remotely at 2:13 a.m.? No one did. Because it hadn't been. I made sure of it. I built a fake audit log, complete with timestamps, fake IP addresses, and trails leading back to Brad's VPN account. Then I let it accidentally leak during a routine security update. By lunchtime, the IT department was in full panic mode. By 3 p.m., the internal audit was launched. And by 6 p.m., Brad was holding an emergency meeting with legal. He thought someone was coming for him from the outside. He had no idea the infection was already inside the walls. But that wasn't the real twist. The real twist? Brad deleted the logs himself. At 9:47 p.m., he logged in from his office, accessed the internal server, and scrubbed the fake breach logs. I watched him do it from my apartment, sipping whiskey and smiling. He thought he was covering his tracks. That's not just unethical. It's criminal. And best of all, I had it all recorded. By the time morning came, Brad had turned a whisper into a wildfire. The board was furious. The legal team started circling like sharks. And Vivian, she was preparing her move. Brad's real power wasn't in his title. It was in perception. The perception that he was brilliant, unshakable, profitable. But perception is a fragile thing. And all it took to shatter it was a single meeting. 2 weeks after the fabricated data breach, the company's quarterly earnings call arrived. Normally, these calls were Brad's playground, his stage to charm investors and paint rosy pictures. But this time, he looked tired, paranoid, desperate. I made sure certain anonymous tips reached 2 major shareholders the day before the call. One hinted at systemic security failures being buried. The other mentioned internal financial manipulation. Neither had proof, but both had just enough detail to make them very nervous. During the live call, Brad's voice trembled. Analysts started probing. Shareholders pressed harder. And then, out of nowhere, Vivian, now in her new executive role, spoke up. She asked, on record, "Brad, are you willing to publicly confirm there were no irregularities with the Q2 contractor invoices or the security logs from the 12th? He froze. You could hear the pause across the line. He mumbled something about internal reviews. The damage was instant. Stock dipped 3% by end of day. That night, an emergency shareholders meeting was requested. Officially, to discuss leadership transparency. Unofficially, it was a mutiny. Brad tried to rally his allies. But things had shifted. His charm didn't work anymore. Too many questions. Too few answers dotting me. I was still invisible. If the board was the company's spine, the executives were its nerves. And they'd begun to twitch. In the days following the earnings call disaster, Brad's inner circle started to fracture. The once loyal execs who nodded at every meeting now avoided eye contact in hallways. The yes men suddenly developed meetings elsewhere. And Brad? He noticed. Worse, he panicked. But that's what I was counting on. Because while Brad was busy chasing leaks and whispering threats, I was orchestrating a symphony of silence. You see, I'd spent the last year quietly earning the trust of people he saw as disposable. The exhausted head of compliance, who Brad had humiliated in front of the board. The burned-out VP of engineering, whose budget had been slashed without warning. Even the janitor who found shredded documents stuffed into the recycling bin. People notice when you listen, and they remember when you protect them. I wasn't just gathering allies. I was reshaping the entire ecosystem around Brad without him ever realizing it. Then came the tipping point. Brad called a surprise exec meeting. The goal? To sniff out whoever was sabotaging him. But I prepared them. One by one, the executives pushed back. They questioned his decisions. They demanded financial transparency. They asked, point blank, why 2 departments have been audited without board approval. Brad exploded. He accused people, threatened job security, tried to fire the VP of HR mid-meeting. But she didn't flinch. Instead, she slid a sealed envelope across the table. That's a formal request for independent arbitration, signed by 7 of us. The room went silent. For the first time, Brad wasn't feared. He was pitted. Some storms arrive with thunder. Others creeping like fog. The audit was the latter. 2 weeks after the executive showdown, Brad received a letter. Not from the board. Not from legal. But from a quiet, almost forgotten department. Internal risk and controls. A unit he'd gutted. Staff he thought were long gone. But I'd revived them. Quietly. Strategically. And now, they were coming for his books. The audit request was legitimate. Too legitimate to bury. It was signed off by both the head of risk and the VP of compliance. 2 people Brad had burned early in his reign. He couldn't stop it without triggering whistleblower protections. He couldn't delay it without violating company bylaws. And worst of all, he couldn't lie. Not with what we were about to uncover. You see, I'd fed the auditors breadcrumbs. A mysterious $600,000 retention bonus paid to an exec who left the following month. Inflated invoices to a shell company that conveniently shared a P.O. box with Brad's former startup. And an IT contractor paid over $1 million for infrastructure upgrades. Yet the servers were still running outdated firmware. It wasn't fraud yet, but it was smoke, and the audit was about to reveal the fire. Brad called an emergency meeting with legal, then finance, then HR. Each time, more of his calls went unanswered. More trusted faces avoided his floor. He tried cornering me in the break room once, voice low and shaking. "You think you're clever, Elias?" I just smiled. "I think I'm quiet," and walked away. Some truths aren't buried. They're hidden in plain sight, on balance sheets and payment trails. Brad's castle had been built on cooked numbers, but now the auditors had arrived with scalpels, and I made sure they knew exactly where to cut. The audit team set up in conference room B. Glass walls, always visible, a silent warning to everyone. Something's coming. They worked methodically, quietly, just like me. They started with expense reports, then consultant invoices, then vendor contracts Brad had approved personally. That's when they found it. Vendor number 31429, Blue Ridge Infrastructure. Millions billed. No service logs. No project records. No corporate registration. Just an address that led to a mailbox in Nevada. Brad panicked. He called his CFO. I'd already spoken to her. Not with threats. Just questions. Like, did you ever actually see Blue Ridge's work? How we vet them? Do you sign off on wire transfers personally? Or does Brad? The seed was planted, and it bloomed in that audit room. By week's end, the auditors issued an urgent concern memo. Confidential. Circulated only to the board and internal counsel. But I'd seen it. The summary? Significant discrepancies suggest potential financial misconduct by the CEO. Formal investigation recommended. Brad's face changed. Not angry. Not scared. Hollow. Like a man already watching the walls collapse. But he wasn't done yet. Because when kings fall, they don't fall quietly. And Brad still had one more card to play. Some men don't surrender when cornered. They throw gasoline on the room and light a match. Brad was unraveling, but not in the way most people do. No outbursts, no rants, just cold, deliberate moves. That's what made him dangerous. He summoned a closed-door board meeting. No audit team, no legal counsel, just executives and longtime allies. He claimed it was a strategic session, but I knew better. He wanted to shift blame before the truth set in. I wasn't invited, but that didn't matter. One of the junior VPs had grown disillusioned, quietly recording the meeting on his smartwatch. He sent me the audio later that night. Brad's voice was calm. Too calm. "Look, there are inconsistencies, but we'll fix them. What we can't fix is panic. If the board makes the wrong move here, the stock tanks. We all lose." Then came the clincher. "And if I go down, I'm not going alone." It wasn't a threat. It was insurance. Classic predator move. Dirty loyalty. But Brad underestimated one thing. Not everyone fears fire when they've already been burned. The junior VP who leaked the recording? He wasn't alone. By the next morning, more executives sent anonymous messages, accounts, documentation, emails, all pointing to one thing. Brad had orchestrated a multi-year shell scheme, diverting funds through dummy contractors, inflating operating costs, and forging compliance certifications. He didn't just steal. He engineered a financial illusion. And now, the illusion was cracking. I compiled the evidence into a master file, a digital dossier of every deception, and I sent it to 3 places: the company's external legal team, the chair of the board, and Brad. I didn't say a word, just the subject line, "The truth you tried to bury." The next day, Brad didn't show up. His office door stayed closed. His calendar? Cleared. By lunchtime, rumors were flying. By 3 p.m., it was official. Brad Remington, CEO of Halberd Capital, had resigned, effective immediately. But I knew that wasn't the end, because men like Brad don't just disappear. When the king falls, it doesn't bring peace. It invites predators to the empty throne. Brad was out, but the chaos he left behind wasn't. Executives scrambled to protect themselves. Shareholders demanded answers. And behind every email, every late-night call, there was fear. Not what Brad had done, but of what else might be uncovered. The board called for an emergency audit, not a superficial one, a forensic autopsy of the company. They hired an outside firm, one with no ties to Halberd, no reason to protect anyone. The mandate was clear. Follow the money, wherever it leads. Meanwhile, I kept my distance. I didn't need to step into the spotlight. That was never my plan. My goal wasn't fame. It was justice. Quiet. Strategic. Final. But I had one more card to play. You see, when Brad resigned, he didn't do it without a plan. His contract included a golden parachute, an exit package worth $12 million, plus stock options and non-compete bonuses. It was a final insult. The man who poisoned the company was about to be rewarded on the way out. Unless someone changed the rules. The documents I leaked, they weren't just evidence. They were leverage. And I knew exactly where to apply pressure. One board member, Marissa Glenn, was already uneasy. She'd voted against Brad's expansion into Brazil. She questioned the creative accounting that padded quarterly earnings. And now, with the company under siege, she was looking for redemption. I sent her one message. Brad's severance package is null under fraud. Clause 17B. Check the fine print. She replied 5 minutes later. I've got it. Leave the rest to me. At the next board announcement, Brad's resignation came with a footnote. Severance withheld, pending investigation. No payout. No soft landing, just silence. But there was still something off. A pattern I couldn't shake. Every document Brad forged, every account he misused, they all trace back to a single name. A person in the finance department, whose access shouldn't have reached that high. Someone who never made waves. Never stood out. Until now. I dug deeper. Turns out, Brad hadn't acted alone. He had a ghost. A cleaner. A shadow. And that shadow had just moved into Brad's office. Some enemies hide in plain sight. Others hide in spreadsheets. But the most dangerous ones, they hide behind other people's mistakes. Her name was Vivian Cross. Senior finance analyst. 10 years with the company. No scandals. No praise. Just invisible. But invisible was the perfect place to be. When you were orchestrating everything. I never paid her much attention. She wasn't on the radar. Wasn't part of Brad's inner circle. Didn't sit in the executive meetings. But every forged signature, every misdirected fund, every financial black hole, they all passed through her terminal. She wasn't a pawn. She was the architect. While Brad barked orders, Vivian rerouted millions, papered over losses, and made the impossible seem profitable. She was the illusionist behind the magician. And now, she'd inherited Brad's empire. Not officially, of course. But the moment he stepped down, Vivian moved. She wasn't interested in the CEO title. Too exposed. But her name started appearing in internal recommendations, shadow task forces, and confidential initiatives pushed by the interim leadership. She was weaving herself into the company's nervous system, quietly, permanently. It was genius. Really. She let Brad take the fall, and in doing so, cleared her own path. No more oversight. No more barriers. She was becoming the ghost in the machine. But there was one thing she hadn't planned for. Me. Because when I took Brad down, I kept one trick up my sleeve that a backup drive. Encrypted. It held every document I accessed. In my final year. Not just Brad's mess. Vivian's fingerprints were all over it. But I needed more. A smoking gun. So I went to the one person Vivian didn't know I knew. Jordan, a junior accountant. Fresh out of grad school. Worked late. Kept logs. And had no idea he'd been in the middle of it all. I showed him one document. He blinked. Wait, that's my approval code. But I never signed off on that. And just like that, I had her. Vivian had been forging internal approvals, using credentials from staff too green to question it. She'd built an empire on borrowed authority. I crafted the narrative carefully. A second dossier, this one with Vivian as the centerpiece. I sent it anonymously to the audit firm. Subject line, the real mastermind. And then I waited. A week passed. No response. 2 weeks. Nothing. But on the third Friday, Halberd's stock price plummeted 18% in a single day. Rumors of internal fraud. An unnamed suspect under investigation. Legal counsel retained. Vivian had become what she never wanted to be, visible. Every empire built in the dark eventually gets pulled into the light. And when it does, it doesn't crumble. It implodes. Vivian didn't panic. At least not at first. She'd survived purges, mergers, audits, and boardroom warfare. A few rumors didn't scare her. But this wasn't a rumor. This was a surgical leak. One she couldn't trace. One she didn't even know the scope of. Within days, the board called an emergency meeting. No agenda. No minutes. No observers. Vivian wasn't invited. That was her first red flag. The second? Her access to the executive database was silently revoked at midnight. She was still technically just an analyst, but for years, she'd had ghost-level clearance. Someone had turned the lights on, and she was standing in the center of the room, exposed. I was watching it all unfold. From the outside, of course. I'd already cleaned my trail, but I kept a backdoor into the system. A breadcrumb left in the maze when I left the company. It let me see the files they were flagging. Every document Vivian had touched in the last 18 months was under review. And then came the email. Not to her. To everyone else. Subject, pending internal investigation, finance division. It didn't name her. But it might as well have. Staff went quiet. Her desk was empty. The eyes that once glanced past her now lingered with suspicion. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was radioactive. But Vivian was too smart to sit still. She activated her insurance plan. A thumb drive. Encrypted. Hidden behind the false panel of her desk drawer. She'd spent years covering for Brad. She had dirt on everyone. She sent one email. Blind copied to 10 addresses. You come for me, I take you with me. Classic scorched earth. But she underestimated the fear I'd already planted in those boardroom walls. The board didn't back down. Not this time. They went on the offensive. The CEO, acting, for now, publicly distanced the company from all rogue finance practices. A special committee was formed. And at 3:42 p.m. on a rainy Wednesday, Vivian was escorted out by security. No handcuffs. No press release. Just silence. Not yet. Because when Vivian fell, she triggered something else. A chain reaction that reached even higher than the boardroom. Remember that shadow investor Brad mentioned? The one pulling strings behind the scenes? He'd stayed invisible for years. But Vivian's collapse had just flushed him out. And the moment his name appeared in the financial logs, I knew the real war was just beginning. Every corporation has a chain of command, but some chains aren't visible. They're whispered about, never documented. They begin and end in shadows. And at the top of this invisible pyramid sat a man even Vivian feared. His name, Silas Maddox. Silas wasn't listed as an executive, a shareholder, or a board member. On paper, he didn't exist, but the company bled for him. Every expansion, every shell company, every anonymous investor backing their riskier ventures. That was Silas, a billionaire with no face, a legend among private equity circles, and a ghost among regulators. Vivian worked for him. Brad bowed to him. The CEO took calls from him at 2 a.m. But when Vivian was exiled, she broke protocol. She dropped a name. His name. That single act changed everything. Silas had stayed quiet for years, pulling strings through intermediaries. But now, someone had documented his existence. That meant exposure. And for a man like Silas, exposure was death. What he didn't know was that I'd been waiting for this moment. This was the last piece, the final domino. For years, I'd studied his movements, the offshore trusts, the silent partnerships, the LLCs registered to ghost towns. Everything Vivian had access to, I now had copies of, meticulously collected, in encrypted drives, stored on physical servers he couldn't remotely erase. It was time for the final move. I crafted a leak. Not to the media. They could be silenced. Not to the SEC. They could be delayed. I wanted someone different. An old mentor. Silas had betrayed decades ago. Someone with enough influence to make noise Silas couldn't muffle. It started small. A podcast. Then a blog post. Then a whistleblower report. And signed. But so detailed, no one could ignore it. Suddenly, Silas's empire began to creak. 2 investment firms cut ties. A foreign government froze one of his trust accounts. And the board? They panicked. For the first time in the company's history, they began a top-down audit. Silas responded like a cornered wolf. He started cleaning house, deleting names, shutting down servers, firing loyalists. He called Brad. Brad didn't answer. He called Vivian. Her number was disconnected. Then he called me. He didn't know who I was. Not really. But he'd seen my work. The precision. The patience. And in a voice that didn't match his legend. He said, "Who are you?" I didn't respond. I just ended the call. Because the truth was, he already knew. Every empire has a protocol for collapse. Silas had one too. A digital deadman switch. Activated the moment his offshore accounts were threatened. Shut down the holding companies. Burn the subsidiaries. Leave nothing for the vultures. If he couldn't have the empire, no one could. But there was one flaw. Me. Silas didn't know I'd intercepted the backdoor codes. He didn't know I'd mirrored his deadman system 2 years ago. When I hacked a forgotten VPN, Vivian once used to send asset logs. Everything he tried to erase, I preserved. Everything he tried to collapse, I rebuilt. Not for him. Not for revenge. But for exposure. I didn't want to ruin Silas in secret. I wanted the world to see it happen. I gave the audit team a breadcrumb trail, laced with undeniable signatures of fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, funding unauthorized acquisitions using pension funds from subsidiaries. It took just 11 hours before federal agencies launched investigations. Not one, not two, 6. Vivian, now safely relocated under a new identity, watched from afar. Brad had gone silent, disappeared, possibly under protection. And me? I waited. On a cold Thursday morning, a convoy of black SUVs pulled up outside the towering headquarters. Silas had built to be untouchable. Agents walked in. No one walked out. By noon, the company's website was offline. Its stock delisted. Its senior leadership frozen out of systems. Silas. Gone. But not really. He tried fleeing. A private jet. Filed under a shell company that once owned a yacht. That once owned a trust. That once owned a skyscraper in Singapore. But I'd already tipped off Interpol. And I'd already ensured that someone slipped a tracking device into his pilot's coffee holder. Silas was arrested mid-flight refuel on a remote airstrip in Malta. No entourage. No escape. No second chances. I watched the footage from a cafe, across the street from the very building, where he'd once ruined lives with a single email. I sipped my tea, and I smiled. Every story ends. But not all endings are loud. Some slip in quietly, like fog under a locked door. Silas Rothschild stood trial behind bulletproof glass. The courtroom packed. Press, analysts, former employees, whose pensions he destroyed. The man once feared, now reduced to hollow eyes and a suit 2 sizes too big. He said nothing. No apology. No remorse. But that didn't matter. Because his empire was gone. And everyone knew. Who dismantled it? I didn't attend the sentencing. I had no interest in watching a ghost fade into prison walls. Instead, I sent a letter. It was addressed not to Silas, but to the board of directors. The very people who once turned their heads as he crushed ethics beneath polished shoes. Inside the envelope was evidence, the final thread in a long, tangled web. Emails, financial ledgers, and a confession audio clip. That Vivian had smuggled to me, right before she vanished. The board resigned within days. Public trust, obliterated. The media had a field day. Mastermind employee topples billionaire CEO. Corporate giant brought down from within. But no one knew my name. They just called me the ghost in the system. And that was enough. I left the city, started somewhere new. No LinkedIn, no public records. Just a small apartment, a coffee shop 2 blocks away. And silence. The kind of silence only those who have finished a long war can understand. Every now and then, I receive encrypted emails from old colleagues. Thank yous, curious inquiries, even job offers. But I never reply. I didn't burn down a kingdom to build another one. I did it because justice, real justice, is rarely loud. It's precise. It's strategic. It's quiet. And when done right, it leaves no fingerprints. My name is Elias Ward. The next time you hear it, someone powerful will be begging for mercy.